Good evening, everybody on the East Coast. Good afternoon, everybody in the West, and good in-between time to all our friends in the in-between spaces, which many of us find ourselves these days. My name is Robt Seda-Schreiber. I am your host tonight of the Social Justice Power Hour, coming to you live from the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice virtual headquarters. Thank you so much for joining us. I am thrilled and honored, as always, to be with you in community. We have an incredible show tonight. We have the author of Evil Geniuses, Fantasyland, and I think at least 7 other books and a bunch of other incredible credits to his name, Kurt Andersen. But before we get to that, of course, we have some housekeeping to take care of, talking about what else is coming up this week as well. Tomorrow night, as always, we have our queer yoga to allow us to take a breath, both literally and figuratively, as a community. Wednesday, we have Jose Luis Filzon, who is an educator activist with EduColor. Josh Gondelman, author of Nice Try, and producer of Jesus and Miro. And Friday night, we have our Open It Out mic night for our LGBTQI community, allies sharing talent and spirit together on the virtual stage. And then coming up, we have so many other incredibly extraordinary people. We have Martha S. Jones, author of Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. We have Peter Cooper, illustrator, journalist, provocateur, been doing this work for 3 decades, my friends, incredible talent. Speaking of talent, Jill Twist, the author of Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. We have the incredible Denise Froman, who's the organizer of Poets for Puerto Rico. We have Carly Usdin, esteemed film director. We have the author of League of Wives, Heath Lee. This is the untold story of women who took on the U.S. government to bring their husbands home during Vietnam. And Reese Witherspoon just optioned it as a movie, so pretty exciting times. 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner T.J. Stiles is going to join us. Kathy Pollitt from The Nation and this wonderful book, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. Mike Hot Pence is going to be with us the night of the vice presidential debate. Who better to join us than Mike Hot Pence? We're going to have a wonderful variety hour to entertain and thrill us before the debate. And in a surreal moment, we are going to bring to you the 1st of October, Lou Diamond Phillips. So lots of incredible stuff coming up, but none more so than the author of this book, New York Times bestseller, Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, A Recent History. And that's just literally the tip of the iceberg. I believe 9 other books written for film, television, stage, also a regular columnist and critic for New York, The New Yorker, Time, among many other magazines. And speaking of magazines, he co-founded the incredibly influential and so before its time for so many reasons, Spy magazine, which I used to read the holy heck out of in my formative years. Also the host and co-creator of Studios 360, which I believe ran for about 20 years on PRI. And here's the thing. Let me bring Kurt Andersen on the stage, and then I have to make an admission to everybody. So welcome to our virtual stage, everybody, Kurt Andersen. Kurt, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My total pleasure.
So I have to be totally honest. I brought you here under somewhat false pretenses, promising a chat about the incredibly important and equally beautiful book, Evil Geniuses. Of course, we will talk about that for the most part of the evening. But really, your work with Studio 360 is like the real-life version of this Social Justice Power Hour. And I just hope that I bring to this show an iota of the empowerment, the entertainment, and the edification all at once that you brought that energy to folks for 20 years, right?
Yeah, and for 20 years, it was a show about, music and movies and dance and design and art and books and everything, art and culture. And it was on public radio on a couple hundred stations. And we stopped doing it actually pretty much like the day before you started doing this. So I hand you the baton.
Oh, don't even, because I take that and run with it. That's
Okay.
I'm going to use that all the time. I'll quote you all the
Okay.
time now.
All right.
How did let me ask you this. I am such a wonk for how people's minds work. And your mind is this incredibly fertile thing. The things that you have done, they've been in different arenas, they've been in wholly different communities. How do you find that inspiration? How do you go from project to project?
Really, I mean, I would say, I mean, individual, I mean, I'm not going to like be mock humble and say I don't have ideas and I don't have inspiration, all that. However, uh, mostly it was doing something and then making friends doing that, and suddenly through the friends or an acquaintance or some opportunity saying, "Oh, here's this other thing adjacent. Let's do that." So I wrote a book when I was very young. I published my first book. It's called The Real Thing. When I was 26 years old, I published a book of sort of funny essays, and that got me a job at Time Magazine. And I did that for a few years. And and I met somebody there, Graydon Carter, and we decided to start this magazine, Spy. And then I met some people there, and so it was really, it was in most of the time, not in every instance, but a result of making friends, creative friends, doing creative things. And then when the time came for whatever reason to move on to the next thing, one or two of them, either they have an idea or I have an idea and I go on to that. So it was really like a kind of movable feast of friendship more than anything. When I started writing novels, which I started doing when I got fired from a big job as editor of New York Magazine in the late '90s, that was the first thing that I sort of did almost entirely on my own. It was like, okay, I'm old now. I'm over 40. I'm 42 or whatever I was when I started that, 41. And I think I have the skill to write a book, maybe. And so I started doing that. But then after that, and while I was doing that again, because of friends I'd made doing other projects, that led to other projects. So, it's not like I've gone into, crazily disparate worlds. It's writing books, making magazines, doing radio shows, writing films, doing a theater piece. They're all broadly, they're all adjacent things. So, but I would say it was the knowing, making friends who were interesting and were game for doing the next interesting thing really was a huge part of it. And then just, taking risks. My first doing Spy Magazine was a huge risk. I had a good job and like, my God, I'm going to leave this good job and go start this crazy thing that will make people angry and make powerful people angry. And that sounds scary. And, when I was 30 and we did it and it worked out well. So I was very fortunate, very lucky to have this big risk taking enterprise that worked out okay, because it encouraged me then to keep taking risks and keep changing lanes when it seemed interesting to do so.
But you said you weren't going to be humble, but there's so much to what you have accomplished, and everything you have done. Sure, there's connecting the dots, but I think what you've done, and I'm not being hyperbolic here at all. You've created community. That the essence of community is that you bringing the spirit and the energy from this project to the next project, bringing this person from this project to the next project. That's the best we can do on this earth, is to bring the energy and the spirit and the collaboration along as we move forward, in our lives and our careers.
Yeah, I know. Well, I appreciate that. And so, and again, it, like my career, it was never like, I have this plan and I shall do this and then I shall do this and then I shall do that. It has been this, I'm not dead yet. It has been this, kind of zigzaggy wandering around. But as you say, with, yes, bringing friends along and then returning to like, hey, we worked together 10 years ago. How about we do this thing now? And that happens too. So yeah, I guess it is a community of which I am, one of the mayors or something. Yeah.
I like that. I like that very much. As with like Studio 360, you would have 1 week Susan Sontag, and then the next week Public Enemy, and it was such an incredible. Again, you say again adjacent, sure, in that they all had important voices to share, but a lot of folks wouldn't see the dots that you see.
Right. Well, and it's not just seeing dots and connecting dots. You're right. It's been a part of a lot of things I've done and still do, and kind of pattern recognition, as the psychologists call it, in way and recognizing patterns that others perhaps don't see. But in that case, it is, and in Studio 360, from the beginning, we said, okay, this is not just going to be high culture. This is not just going to be low culture. Not just going to be pop. It can be all across the board if it's interesting. And if I can either be or make believe, and usually be interested in whomever I'm talking to or whatever I'm talking about. So in that sense, my brain or my ability to have conversations with, the people from Public Enemy as well as Susan Sontag is the connective tissue. The fact is that, culture is a big thing and there's lots of pieces of it. And certainly during the 20 years from 2000 to 2020 that I was doing that show, culture was more and more becoming balkanized, right? So those worlds didn't talk to each other more and more. When I was young, it was like much more one big culture. And, whereas, for better and for worse over the years, as I say, everything got siloed more and more. And so to me, the pleasure was always saying, look, I have no advanced degrees. I have no special knowledge, but I'm interested in this, and I'm interested in this and this and this. And they would never be, things that the algorithm at Amazon would say, well, if you're interested in Susan Sontag, perhaps you'll like Public Enemy. But that's why we're humans and not algorithms, right? So I would say, trying to find ways to be interested and sometimes connecting weird dots. I remember as we were finishing the show and we did a finale episode, and we didn't include this on the finale episode, but I remember one of the early on, like in the first year, maybe the first 6 months, we did this piece by this woman who the reporter producer found the connections between Wagner, Richard Wagner, the classical composer, and this death metal band that was somewhat big at the time. Like I think they were Norwegian or something like that, Swedish, or maybe called Rammstein. Maybe they were German. I don't know. But anyway, she did this piece about Wagner and Rammstein together. And there was this moment in the middle of that piece where literally it was this hard cut without any announcement or anything from, a Wagner piece to a Rammstein song. And I'm telling you, I just the fact that we did that and we got away with that and people didn't kick us off the radio, I felt like, okay. So it wasn't even connecting. Well, it was connecting these disparate dots, and the fact that it happened so viscerally in this audio way was just. I thought like, okay, I'm glad I'm doing this.
So forgive me if I'm too wonky about this. I love process, and I hope that our audience and our viewers are as interested as I am. But I'm going to be a little selfish and move forward a little bit more. When you do this, do you consider your audience first, or do you trust yourself enough to know that your instincts and what you want to see or what you want to hear or what you want to experience is interesting to them?
Well, it's a good question, and it's both, of course. I early on realized that I didn't have that much interest, or I didn't have interest really in making things, whether it's a magazine or writing a book or doing a play or whatever it is. I'm only interested in making things that I, as a consumer, would like and be interested in. So, like, I mean, I would never want to be like you know, the editor of a magazine that I wouldn't want to read, or the, head of a TV channel that I really wouldn't be the viewer of. I just don't. I mean, people do that. Lots of people do that and do that successfully. I just never wanted to. So, therefore, I that gave me the luxury to only really have to do things to please myself. Now, one can carry that too far if one has an audience to please as well, and if one goes too far down one's own eccentric rabbit holes, maybe the audience at a certain point will go, dude, I'm not with you on that. But basically, if you're, if you think, or I've thought, okay, I'm not such a crazily eccentric person. If I'm interested in this and I can explain and convey why it's interesting to me and how it connects to this and how that connects to this, I can bring people along with me. So that's the thing. I mean, I don't assume that people who listen to me or read me or whatever are necessarily like me at all in any outward sense. But, I feel like they're whatever. They're curious enough. They're intelligent enough. They have a sense of humor. They share enough that we can have this conversation, and I don't have to second guess myself and think like, well, will the audience like this? And it's funny. I was just talking to somebody the other day about she or he, I forgot who it was saying how an editor kept making them, explain too much in some piece. Let's say it was she, I don't even remember, had written, identifying this person and that writer and this musician. And I said, well, sometimes you got to do that if they're obscure or whatever, or they're, only old people would know or only young people would know. Sure, I get that. But my joke about that was always, I am never going to say, British playwright William Shakespeare. I'm just going to assume that everybody knows who William Shakespeare is. And if they don't, they can Google him. So trusting that even if your audience doesn't get every word you say at the time, the fact that you as an author, as a creator, whatever, are trusting them to get it or get it later or whatever, I think people appreciate that, right? That you're not talking down to them, or that you're just like you're doing your thing, and they'll get it and they'll keep with you, or they won't, but enough do that I've been able to keep doing that.
And how do you decide between when you have an idea, when you have the germination, the very, epiphany of I want to discuss this, or I want to write about this, or I want to expose folks to this? Is there a process that it becomes an article as opposed to a book? Like, how do you know when there's enough meat on the bone? And I say this as a vegetarian, but that will be this, that, or the other thing.
You don't necessarily. I mean, I wrote 4 novels, and now that I've written these 2 big nonfiction books, my intention is now to return to novel writing from big nonfiction history book writing. So with novels, the question there is, I had this idea. Is it a screenplay? Is it a short story or a novel? Basically, for me, it could be a play too, but I wrote a play once. So, so it's figuring out that form. And, but then once you have an idea within fiction, I have lots of notions and ideas of scenes and pieces of dialogue or characters, whatever. I just throw them into a file, and then, as I do that, I don't know where they'll end up. Most of my fictional writing has been in novels, so that's where most of them end up. But so I don't, in terms of like an article or a book, it's pretty obvious to me after a while, after you, not instantly, but after sitting with something for days or weeks or months, it's pretty obvious whether, I have a couple of thousand words in me on this subject or 100,000 words. But that said, I had this idea 10 years ago about this observation of mine that pop culture especially sort of has not changed as rapidly and radically as it used to. And why is that? And I wrote an essay about that and published an essay about that. And I thought, okay, I did that, a few thousand words. But then on Evil Geniuses, when I was doing this book and thinking about it over the last several years, I realized that the ideas in that piece had connections to this book I was writing that had nothing, that when I began it, it wasn't obvious that this book would include that discussion. But then as I thought, as it turned out over years, this thing over here that I'd done connected with this thing now that I was doing. And so I guess the point is to be, to trust your instincts about how interested are you in this thing, what's its best form, to make that judgment usually pretty easily, but then be open to the fact that this thing you thought you were done with can suddenly spring back to life and become part of this other project that, you never would have imagined it would be, which is to say you don't always know. And I find my work and, because I have done a lot of things, writing about design and being a design critic and writing fiction and all this stuff, history lately, it does cross-fertilize. And I find ideas that I had, just a passing idea in a novel 3 novels ago, suddenly one comes into my head as I'm, writing this history about the 19th century. So, there's a lot of sort of cross-fertilization within my, within my mind.
So there's never been a time where you've written an article for a magazine or a newspaper and been like, damn, that could have been a book. Like there's
not really, no, but again, in this case, it was, I wrote this article and then, it became a component of a book later, that I had no anticipation, but no, nor have I had the other problem, which, no, I will not name names, but there are many books that ought to be articles, in my view, nonfiction books, that really don't deserve to be books. I mean, not because they're bad, just because they're not worth, I don't think they're worth 70 or 90 or 130,000 words,
So there's a prescience in your work and your journey in your career that has to be explored. I mean, in Spy, one of your arch nemeses was our current president.
Yep.
When he was elected, I actually did, through everything else that was going on, I thought of you and Spy Magazine in general and how it must have affected you, because you have been so long not a thorn in his side, although that too, but you saw him for what he was very, very early on.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, no. And so my co-founder and partner on creating Spy, Graydon Carter, as we were starting to figure out Spy back in 85, probably 80, maybe early 86, he did, because we have to pay the rent, he did a freelance profile of this guy, Donald Trump, who wasn't yet famous, even really that famous in New York yet. He was just starting to build, he was building Trump Tower, but he wasn't really famous. And he went and did this profile and came back and just said, was talking about what an asshole he was and what a ridiculous person he is. And then we were starting Spy. And so he naturally became in the first issue, we had the cover story of the first issue of Spy magazine when it was just a New York magazine before it became a national magazine. The cover story was the 10 most jerks, the 10 most embarrassing New Yorkers. I said, let's put this guy Donald Trump. Let's make him one of those 10 most embarrassing, those 10 jerks. And so we kept at him because as we were covering him, he was doing his best to become a celebrity in New York. And so he was in his bullying and his ostentation and his lies and his stupidity, all of which were small scale and had no giant consequences as the ones since lately do. He was fun to make fun of and ridicule and cover, and we did journalism about him. But then I stopped thinking about him very much. You know, I mean, I don't know that I never watched Apprentice, for instance. I saw a minute here or there, you know, but I never watched it. So I just, you know, after I stopped doing Spy in '93, you know, he'd just gone bankrupt, and I thought, well, that's the end of Donald Trump, probably, but it wasn't, of course. And but I would say only very, very occasionally would I even pay attention to him. And I was a student of, you know, I was a Donald Trump student. I found him fascinating and funny and ridiculous and interesting when we were doing Spy for 6 years. And then 15 years, 20 years, whatever. And then he runs for president. And I remember the debate in 2015 or 16. I forget when it was. Maybe early 16. And he was, one of the things, in addition to journalism about him, we invented nicknames for people, epithets for people, not unlike Donald Trump does, I guess. But we had tried out lots on him, and finally in 1988 stuck with short-fingered vulgarian Donald Trump. And so every time he got mentioned in Spy magazine, he was called short-fingered vulgarian Donald Trump. I mean, if we were doing a story about him, we wouldn't do that 10 times. We would do it once and then go, but short-fingered vulgarian Donald Trump. So during the election, Marco Rubio starts making fun of his short fingers. And one night on a debate stage, they start arguing about it. And they both turn it into a thing which we never intended it to be, about like whether his dick was small or large. And the fact that this goofy, silly thing we had invented 28 years earlier was now in a presidential debate made me feel like I was tripping. And B, that these U.S. senator and another presidential candidate had turned it into a smutty, dirty joke about the size of his schlong. Well, it was some kind of peak crazy moment. And then I've had to spend I have spent the last several years, being somebody, going on television and radio and saying, yes, I have been, I've studied Donald Trump for a long time. So it became this kind of late breaking, sideline of mine to be once again a Donald Trump expert.
But then again, what you did was you extrapolated, and you made sure that it wasn't just about him, and you saw the larger piece of it. And it goes back to what we first started talking about, connecting these dots. Yeah. And there are these great couple of quotes from Fantasyland, the first nonfiction piece, which I guess, like Evil Geniuses, is they're bookends, right?
Correct.
And you say, if you're fanatical enough about enacting and enforcing your fiction, it becomes indistinguishable from nonfiction. So that is obviously about Trump himself, but about the culture and the climate that he's created.
Well, that he's a symptom of. And the thing about Fantasyland, which I started thinking about, early in the 2000s, when I just thought, wow, people have gone overboard since I was young about believing whatever crazy thing they want to believe because they can, in every way, religiously and otherwise. And so I finally decided, I'm going to do a book about this, and my publisher very nicely encouraged me to, and then I did it. So it's this history of 500-year history of America, and to that point, all these ways in which Americans in particular have a kind of iffy hold on reality, really. And then I finished it. I was finishing it in the beginning of 2016, just when it suddenly looked like, wow, Donald Trump may be nominated for president. So it wasn't about Donald Trump. I didn't even have him in my head. If he hadn't run for I started in 2014, and I was finishing it in early 2016. If he hadn't run for president, would I have even mentioned him in the book? Maybe, but I would say 50-50. Probably not. So then, however, he runs for president and gets elected president just as I'm we're getting ready to publish it. And it was like, I mean, if I believed in the kind of God, or a God with a sense of humor, who provided, illustrations of the perfect embodiment of every theme of my book, of that book, there he was. It was crazy. And so it was not that the book was attempting to be prophetic or prescient, particularly, just saying, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this, but America was always weird in this way, and that weirdness has gotten out of control, and here's the story of how that happened. And then there's suddenly Donald Trump being elected president, like, holy cow, being the kind of poster boy of my book. And so for better and worse, I guess I saw that one coming.
And you said you used the term symptom, that he's a symptom. And I've been toying with this, and I thought you were the perfect person to ask. Is he a symptom or is he a byproduct? And is there a distinction there? Because to me, I think there is, and I've been trying to really parse that out, and I thought that who better to ask?
Well, tell me what the difference is. I mean, if symptom is if we're talking about pathologies and diseases, the right word, and I think we are, or as far as metaphors go, I think that's to me the Fantasyland problem or thing in America was always like this chronic condition that had some good sides, right? It's like you can be energetic, but if it gets too extreme, then you're manic, and that's a disease, right? Or you can be sometimes sad and morose, and that's fine and that's good. But if it becomes chronic and pathological, then you're depressed. So I feel like that's why I felt like symptom is correct, or for me, byproduct. Sure, but that changed the metaphor to this system that isn't, an organism, and so I wouldn't even say byproduct. He's more of a product, I would say, of America, of the kind of everything becomes entertainment in America. The perception is just as good or better than reality part of America. The I can believe anything I want part of America. The businessman or who just uses blue smoke and mirrors to sell his shit. That's very American. So all these different pieces of what is American, some of the many of them unattractive pieces of what it is to be American. He is that. So I wouldn't even say byproduct. I would say he's more directly a product of certain aspects of the American character.
That makes sense. Yeah. And here's something else you say in Fantasyland. You're actually quoting from Tolkien. And this is something Tolkien said right before the Nazis started World War II, right? And the quote is this, quote, "Fantasy can, of course, be carried to excess. It can be put to evil uses. It may even delude the minds of which it came." Do you think that these folks who, and it's now that whole community of people who follow the administration and no matter what they do at this point will continue to follow, and I saw something yesterday on one of the social media, I think it was probably Twitter. There was footage of the rally, and it was all these folks milling around right next to each other, actually like kept in cages, like closer together they needed to be, without masks on. And when I first saw it, I thought it was someone who was commenting on how horrific this was. But it was actually Trump himself tweeting this out proudly of this is how his supporters were gathering.
Yes. Well, yes. And in fact, I saw a tweet in the last couple of days as well, where his son, Donald Jr., was at an event in northern Minnesota, and where most of the people were wearing masks and they were socially distanced. And he got up and complained somewhat good-naturedly about that fact. Now, So, I mean, it's not exactly Jonestown, the mass suicide in 1970, whatever it was, 42 years ago, but man, it is a cousin of that. And to your point about, you know, the Nazis in the 1930s. I mean, I didn't put this in Fantasyland, but and you know, of course, writing a book, especially a big book like that, is cut that, all these things you cut. But what I didn't know until I did the research on that is the degree to which Germany in the 1930s was totally beset with fantastical belief in amulets and crystals and, you know, we think of fascism, it's all about rationality and the trains run on time. Yeah, but it's also about every species of craziness. And by the way, there are pilots and soldiers being fed massive amounts of methamphetamine to fight. So knock wood that we're not in the 1930s again in any significant way. But you know, at the end of Fantasyland, I quote this amazing. There's a great book by the writer Hannah Arendt, who escaped Nazi Germany as a young woman and became a great political philosopher in this country. And she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I had never read it. I probably was assigned it in college and skipped it and didn't read it. But I back in 2015 and 16, 2016, I read for the first time the third third of it, and there's page after page, and this one page in particular that I quote at length at the end of Fantasyland about how the leader of mass movements, and she's talking about Hitler and Stalin in the Soviet Union, can lie, and when his lies are revealed, his followers believe, oh, how clever he was to have lied, even though we fell for his lies, and on and on and on like that. And I was thinking, and it just gave me chills in terms of the you know, obvious sort of psychic cultural parallels of these cult-like followers, and that's what it is. It's a cult, and now, you know, with QAnon even more so, yeah, it's scary. And a line I quote a lot, which was attributed to Mark Twain, and he probably didn't ever say it, but he said things like it, which is that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And you know, and some of them are chilling rhymes, and I think that's one of them. And let's hope we you know, put an end to it before it puts an end to us.
Yeah, speaking of putting an end to us, I mean, it's just there's not a day that goes by where I don't think it's so far beyond the pale when you have someone like Herman Cain who dies from COVID after being in a rally, you know, gloating about not wearing a mask. And then that should be enough, right? Right there's your story. Right there's your you know. But then they have him tweeting from beyond the grave.
I know,
right? And then you're like, there's no way you could imagine this. I mean, if this was in Spy magazine, you know, a couple of decades ago, I would have read it and said, that's well, what a great lampoon, what a great satire.
Totally. No, I mean, and people have commented on it. I continually comment on it, but the degree to which life in this crazy Trumpian moment of it outruns satire just day after day after day, where it's just, you know, literally, if you were writing a satirical novel, as I have, you know, this is so, at least it's beyond my taste in terms of the broadness of its comedy. It's crazy. So there you go.
So you write Fantasyland, and it comes out right before Trump is elected. Mm-hmm. So and I dare anybody to read it. I mean, now knowing that, but not knowing that, you would think it was written after. You would think that it was so much that's just of the moment, yet it was written before the moment.
Yeah.
And what prompted, you know, the unofficial sequel? What prompted Evil Geniuses to be what there to tell?
Yeah, I mean, basically, people, many people responded very enthusiastically to Fantasyland. So, and I'd never done a book like this. I'd written little nonfiction books, but never a big history book kind of thing, as Fantasyland was. And so there was that, and I realized as I was doing the research, and then as I was out talking about the book to people, I realized if America is fucked right now a little bit or a lot, and has been for a while, and here's the story of how we got into these ditches, I realized that Fantasyland only kind of told half of the story I have to tell about how that happened in the last few decades, and that was the story of how our suckerdom, our falling for make believe, our falling for our desire to believe, by God, anything I want. I don't care what the scientists said. I don't care what the experts say. I'm going to believe it anyway. All that stuff, which was the subject of Fantasyland, was half of the story. But then there was this other very different story of that wasn't about, well, that how did America become so unfair, economically unfair? Now, America had slavery and racism from the get-go, obviously, and sexism and all the rest. But economically, we got, over most of the time, things were getting economic, not only growth, but progress was happening. It was the pie was being shared more and more equally. And then you had minimum wages, and children couldn't work, and you didn't have to work more than 40 hours, and you had Social Security, and on and on and on. And why did that suddenly stop? Why did things get so much more unequal and so much more insecure and so much more just screwed up in terms of work life and economics when I was a young man? And so that was the other half of the story. So it was this one half of the story, the Fantasyland half, which was more or less organic. Nobody made it happen exactly, although, as I explained in that book and as I explained differently in Evil Geniuses, the political right used that in a big way, continues to use it in a big way, look at QAnon and the fact that QAnon believers are running for Congress now as Republican nominees. But Evil Genius is the story of how a very few guys, and they were all men virtually, they were mostly men, around 1970 and through the 70s and then the 80s and then the 90s, but especially from like the late 70s through the 80s, decided, okay, this economic progress thing is kind of getting out of control, and there's too much scrutiny of big business, and too much, rich people need to be rich again, and business needs to be unregulated, and let's try to stop this tide of progress that the late 60s certainly seemed to be about into the early 70s, and get back the power, fortify the power of big business and the wealth of the wealthy. And just the very, very deliberate, strategic, long war that this set of people, of basically CEOs of big corporations and a certain kind of right-wing economic zealot and rich people, and in some cases combinations or two or three of those things, set up this, what the billionaire Warren Buffett later called a class war, and it really was. Did it turn into a class war and made America more unequal than it had been in a century, made America more insecure than it had been in almost a century, and on and on. So Fantasyland is half the story, like how our kind of Native American craziness grew out of control through what happened in the last 40 or 50 years. And this other one is how our kind of American, there's very good stuff about America, that we liked the new, and we liked, and we were making and progress, and things were getting more equal. How that was suddenly changed, like overnight, practically, certainly in a decade, by these people who felt that the power and wealth were getting taken away from them. So that's it. I mean, a friend of mine, you said I could use dirty words, so I will again. A friend of mine said, "Oh, so it's your 2-volume history of the fucking of America." I said, "Yeah, that'll do." You know.
And the publisher didn't let you use that as a subtitle?
I didn't suggest that. I didn't suggest that. And you asked earlier about your audience and will they be with you? I felt they might have turned off a few potential readers with that.
You didn't think so? I don't think so. I think that you probably would have gotten more. But
maybe a different kind of reader, perhaps. Yeah.
So these are the 2 books we're talking about: Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, and Fantasyland, How America Went Haywire. They're both incredible books, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows we have a bookshop.org list for the Social Justice Power Hour, all the authors that have been on. I strongly suggest you have these books in your library. They're really important books. Bookshop.org, of course, supports independent bookstores, so we like their business model. Buy these books. Buy one for yourself. Buy one for a friend. Buy one for an enemy who will become a friend. Buy one for your local school district, because these are the kind of books that have history and are prescient in many ways and would be really well worth having on a high school library bookshelf. But speaking of libraries, also please do call your local library and make sure they have copies of these. That's one of the most important things you can do, aside from buying the books. Call your local library, making sure it's on their shelves, and if they don't have it, you can request it, and they'll get a copy. And that's the way a lot of our community can be exposed to these kind of important books. You know, that people can't afford to buy a book themselves. They can go to a local library and still be able to experience it, and it's worth experiencing. So here's my question to you.
Yes, sir.
Co-creator of Spy Magazine, mid-'80s, sitting down at a cafe with the author of Evil Geniuses. What do they say to each other?
That's an interesting question. Well, the author of Evil Geniuses, the older me would, I wouldn't be like, dude, you're doing it all wrong, or pay more attention to what's going on. I might say, pay a little more attention to what's happening systemically, it wasn't as though I was oblivious. I mean, we in Spy, for instance, and in other journalism I did, but we in Spy, we were, doing exposés of bad rich people and so forth, and corrupt politicians and the rest. So it wasn't as though we were just party time having fun and doing nothing else. But I would say, I don't know, I could say, the old me to the young me, like, you're not paying enough attention to how this economy of ours is being ruined for the vast majority of people. And I'm just telling you, maybe don't wait until 2001, 2005, when in fact I started waking up to that stuff, to do it maybe a little sooner than 15 years from now. You should read this book and that book and that book. I might say that, but if that magical happenstance encounter could really happen, maybe it's better. Maybe it's like one of those time travel, sci-fi books where you don't want to interfere with the past, because then what happens? Maybe it would have been a wrong move for me to convince myself earlier that, I was a useful idiot for the rich people and the right. I don't know. But if I had to give a piece of advice, it would be like, it's not just about these, individual freaks like Donald Trump and or other zillionaires. There's something more. There's a systemic thing going on, and maybe you should pay more attention to that. I mean, that's what I didn't know, and that's what I wasn't paying attention to. Whether the 2020 me should actually advise the 1986 me of that, I don't know.
I love that because I play that mind game with myself often, and I think about the short-term benefits are really very attractive, but when you think about how does it change exponentially, and so
Yeah.
it's very interesting that you touched on that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I don't, I don't have many regrets. Like, somebody, occasionally, half jokingly, people say to me, "Oh, you and Spy, you made Trump famous." Well, no, we didn't. But, and, and I say, by the way, we were trying to kill baby Hitler by the, by, or at least make ridiculing and exposing baby Hitler as the monster he would become. But no, I don't have, I don't have huge regrets. I not because I am without remorse or sadness or contrition or anything else, but so far I haven't made any gigantic mistakes that I feel are gigantic. I made plenty of mistakes, but not profound ones.
Well, I really do. I do feel, and I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think it can be overstated. Your career and your path and your journey are really a model for how we grow. And you took what you were doing, that satire, and incredibly intelligent and meaningful, but still, there was a veneer of being a brat, so to speak. And you've grown, and you wrote these two incredibly important books, and you don't need the New York Times to say it, although they did. But you've learned to use your voice, and you've learned to grow and evolve into what your talent can really bring to the community.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So let me ask you this, because I cannot believe how quickly time has gone, and we only have a few minutes left, and thank you so much for the time you spent. So how do we look to the future? What do we do? Does this election turn out like, and my in-house counsel will warn me not to say how we hope it will, but how do we move forward as a country, as a nation, as a people, as a community, as a world? What's next for us, and how do we best move forward together?
Well, one thing I would say, whatever happens, the kind of compassion, kindness, love that obviously the Bayard Rustin Center and you exemplify and try to nurture is more valuable than ever. So apart from how the election goes or how economic and social policies are or aren't transformed, the first order of business is to get rid of this grotesque symptom or product, the president, and his inexcusably enabling Republican people who should know better and do know better. And, if they believe in hell, they should believe that they're going there now. Anyway, we have to do that first. Then if it turns out all right, and we have, knock wood, we shouldn't be complacent, and we should each and every one of us do everything we can to make sure everyone we know is vote. And if you have money, give it. And if you can do phone banks, do that. We got 50 days. And but if that happens, and if the U.S. Senate is taken away from the Republicans, the majority of it, I won't say the sky is the limit, but then we're on our way. Then it's a good first step. And then we can argue about, what should be done. But I then will be hopeful. Basically, I've described myself often as 51% hopeful, so far in my life. It's like, I'm not a super optimist, but like I'm a little more hopeful than not always, and I look at the, as famous people have said, the arc of progress bending toward justice, So if things go okay between now and November and December or January or whenever this is settled, this election, if things go the right way, I will be not only will I have a moment whenever the moment comes of the most intense glee I think I will have ever, the most intense social glee that I will have ever had. I mean, I think of those pictures, that my parents experienced at the end of the World War II of just crowds in the street and all that. I will feel that for a little while. Then I feel that there will be, depending on how it all goes, that it will be the first step toward a more just and fair and equitable society, and that we still have a chance to avoid doom. I, even though as a kind of optimist of a certain age from the middle of America, where everybody was supposed to be optimist, even though they're all also sort of depressed a lot of the time, I have never felt as much as a kind of binary thing of like, we're either going to step off the abyss in that general social way, although kindness and compassion will still continue, or we will take the first step away from the abyss back and start, climbing the mountain. And it's a long slog. And that's the other thing I would say. And that's what I as I wrote this in Evil Geniuses, this history of how the evil geniuses and the rich and the zealots and the big business did what they did so brilliantly over the decades they did it and still do it to twist and change our economic system. Evil genius, as I say in the book, is still genius, and it can be read as a kind of guidebook of, they did this in a fairly short order, but they did it by keeping their eye on the ball and by playing a long game. And that's what I would say, to progressives is, play the long game, keep your eye on the ball, don't get distracted by things that don't matter as much. And that's what's got to be done. But first, what's got to be done is what we got to do, in November.
I appreciate the hopefulness of what you're saying. Someone who's seen and lived through and been a journalist of these times over the past couple of decades and seen the rise of all this ugliness and geniuses, to have hope still allows us all to have that much more hope.
Yeah.
So we thank you.
As I talk to you in a couple of months, I may be out of the hope business, but right now I'm hopeful.
Well, you know what? I'd love to talk to you in a couple of months. I'd love to have you back on the show after things are settled and figure out what's our next step, what's the future look like. And,
sure.
And I think there's going to be a lot of work to do, even if everything turns out the way we hope it does. There's going to be a lot of work to do to keep those folks, as you said, their eyes on the prize, as it were. Remembering what put them into that office.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. Again, let me just say the two books we're talking about, and a bunch of other stuff, right? Fantasyland and Evil Geniuses. Please go to bookshop.org to our list, and you can buy them there easily, or any other way but please support local independent bookstores if you can. Kurt, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Oh, thank you. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
All right, and I'm going to say goodnight to our community, and I'll come back and say goodnight to you privately in the green room, as it were. But I'll get you in time for dinner, I promise.
Okay, thanks.
My friend, thank you. So that's Kurt Andersen, everybody, talking about Evil Geniuses in Fantasyland. Again, please do yourselves a favor, support Kurt's work, but also support yourselves and your well-being by reading and having these books in your library. It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening. Yet another extraordinary guest. We thank Kurt Andersen. We thank you, our beloved community, for being with us. It's always such an honor and a pleasure to do this. I never imagined we'd be doing it for almost 150 episodes and having folks like Kurt and Jose Vilzon on Wednesday and Josh Gondelman on Thursday. But we're honored and thrilled and so inspired by all of them, but mostly you, our community, who joins us each and every night. So thank you very much, everybody. Please Have a great 22 hours and 55 some odd minutes. We'll see you again tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Remember, please be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And almost most importantly, really be good to yourselves, my friends. Much love and respect. We'll see you again tomorrow night, everybody.